Hello friends, we are now live to talk about improvements in the System.Diagnostics.Activity APIs. So who wants to talk through this? Tara, do you want to do this or?
Yeah, I can give some quick overview about what we are trying to do here. So basically we have the System Diagnostics APIs today, which is providing some APIs to how to publish tracing information and how to listen to this tracing information that published and collected and so on. And in the same time, we got the Open Telemetry project, the open source, which is defining the specs for how to do tracing and exporting the tracing data and so on. This is open source, is defining the specification for how to do that. And it's going to be or it's already, implemented in different languages like Java, Go, and of course, .NET is implementing it. And so Open Telemetry is opening the door for supporting more scenarios that we don't currently support in our System Diagnostics APIs. And the goal here, we have listed down, if you go down a little bit, we listed some goals that we need to achieve by adding these APIs. So let's go more. Here is the goals. So if we go through the goals, the number 3 is the main goal from my point of view, is to have activity. Activity is the main class in System Diagnostics, which is used to publish tracing data in general. So activity needs API representation of Open Telemetry span concepts. So we need span is a similar class in Open Telemetry that is doing the same as activity in System Diagnostics. So we need to close the gaps and support all scenarios that span is currently supporting it. This is one of the goals. And the other thing is, like, we are already discussing now is if it is possible, we can get rid of the span in the Open Telemetry, fully get rid of it, and have just the activity is the main class that it can be used even in Open Telemetry to publish tracing data. This is one of the goals. And the other goals is, today we have some limitation with the activities. For example, about if you want to listen to the activity, you have to listen to a specific, using diagnostic source or diagnostic listener, you have to listen to specific activity names or something like that. It's restricted to know the names that you are going to listen to. So you don't have a way to listen to any activities or all activities if you want to. So this is one of the scenarios we need to support also. Yeah, of course, second goal also is to have a way to filter what to listen to and what you don't want to listen to for the activities when publishing any data. Goal number 4 also is important, which is the API usability. So today, the way that you can use activities has some pattern how to use it, and this pattern actually is a little bit not neat. To use, and we are trying to simplify the pattern to be very simple. I think we have some good example for this. How to if you go down a little bit, maybe we have the code sample. I don't remember. Yeah, go down more. Yeah, more. This is the code sample. So today, if you look at this is how usually people listen, use the activities. So basically they create this activity listener in the beginning, from diagnostic source, and passing the names that they are interested to use. And first, because the library code or the app code, they trying not to create activity if nobody is listening to it. So there is no point to create it. So what they do is they try to avoid creating the activities by checking first about like, if the listener is enabled, if anybody listening, and if it is yes, so it go and do another check, which is activity listener is enabled, and check if Azure Core HTTP request, if somebody listening to this. And if there is somebody is listening, so at that time only, like you go and create the activity and try to bot the stuff. But if nobody is listening, so there is no point to create the activity at all. And later, because after you do that, either created the activity or not, later in the code, you have to check about like if activity we did create it before or not. And if we created it, so we have to stop it at that time. So this is how it's written today. If you go a little bit down, yeah, this is, here. In the up screen, this is how we are trying to simplify. No, go up a little bit. Yeah, the top of screen, yeah. In the top of screen, this is how we are trying to simplify the pattern now. So basically, we have something called activity source. We are going to talk about this later, in more details. This activity source is the way, you create, usually the library will create just one instance of it. And later, they can use it to create the activity. So we introduce something called start activity in the activity source. This is the method that you create activity with. You notice that this method is returning nullable string, nullable object, activity object is not returning just non-nullable, which is mean like, this method will do this work for you. Like it go and try to find if anybody listening or not, or something like this. If nobody listening, so it will return you null. If somebody is listening and interested to create the activity, it will create you the activity. And also we made activity as disposable. So if somebody created activity and you inside using block, so it will be automatically get disposed. Disposed means like we are stopping the activity object at that time.
So I have a question. So it seems like you're trying to optimize allocations by returning null if activity is not started.
Right.
And some work that is happening inside. But the start activity overloads, they take a lot of parameters that are quite complex. And it seems like I have to, for example, create all the dictionaries with tags before I can call start.
No, this is optional parameters for start activity. We have a couple of overloads that there is a simple one, which is take like just the activity name and what we call it activity kind. This is simplest one. But if you want to have more control, you can pass more parameters with the other overloads. And in the other overloads, it has optional parameters. You don't have to create all of them.
Yeah, but I'm saying if my usage scenario is such that I want to pass those additional parameters, I have to kind of create them before I call your start method.
That's right.
Which means I'm going to spend a lot of, basically there's going to be some cost, and then your activity returns null, and I'm like,
yes.
Oh, shoot, I just created the dictionary.
In activity source, we have some method, which is called, I don't remember, is enabled or is somebody listening, something like this. We will see it later. This is just, you can check this, call this method and tell you if anybody listening or not before even creating the parameters. So we have it in activity source, yes.
So if I don't want to create these dictionaries, you recommend that I go back to the previous pattern that you said is not as usable?
Yes.
Is this the best we could do? Because one additional thing I'm thinking we could do it is use a callback where, like, we call you and say, yes, we have an activity, go fill in the, I don't know if it's actually gonna help. It could be, a wash, meaning, the usability negatives of having a callback may not be something that we want.
Yeah, the listener, you will see it later. We will have a different callbacks, but this is this callbacks will get after calling start activity. So
But yeah, I mean, I think I know what you mean, Christoph, and I did at one point prototype something that had a callback like that. I think I needed to do a little bit of work to make sure I wasn't I mean, you potentially wind up doing an allocation for the delegate that you pass as the callback, but if you're a little bit careful, you can avoid that too. But it seemed like just doing the is enabled check wasn't that much more verbose than sort of setting up the callback, and it seemed pretty straightforward in terms of understanding what's happening. Yeah. But yes, it does start to go back. It doesn't go all the way back to sort of the complexity of the previous code, but it does sort of increment back in that direction. One of the things that maybe made me feel a little bit better about that is presumably the only people that are going to be calling with the large number of parameter overloads are probably folks that are the ingestion point for activities, like where it's first coming in from a external source. And those folks are probably pretty rare as software components go. Like Kestrel is one example. If someone were to make some sort of, gRPC server or other like custom protocol server, they might have to make one. But literally there might be 5 or 10 people in the world that are like making those sorts of customized components. So I didn't feel super bad if those small handful of people get a pattern that's a little more complicated.
I see. So you're saying that, for example, something like a reusable library like an Azure SDK component would not pass tags?
So right there in that example, you can see you don't have to pass the tags to start activity. In fact, we encourage you not to. Instead, you add the tags after you've already made the decision that the activity is going to be needed.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, yeah, okay, I think that's fine. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, the other code example in the bottom of the screen here is just like the way how to create a listener using the activity source to listen to the activities, and it will have like 5 callbacks. I mean, just handle different situations. We will go through this, later. So we can start looking at the APIs. If anybody have any question before we go there?
Actually, I have one more question. So I like your 5th point, saying that one of the goals is to be backwards compatible with the pattern that we established a year ago or something. Mm-hmm. So in our code in Azure SDK, when we basically wrap calls into the networking stack with create a new activity and kind of something that we can do with the APIs that you just showed. Mm-hmm. The only difference that I'm seeing is that we also catch exceptions, and when an exception propagates, we call scope failed and we pass exception. What's the equivalent in the new APIs? Like if I get an exception and I want to, add it to the span, log it, what is the API?
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so OpenTelemetry has a proposed API called Status, which they sort of use to record their error information. And we looked at it, and we were pretty skeptical that that is what we would want, because it looked highly focused on gRPC error codes, and there was no good mapping for an exception or any other kind of error code that you might have that wasn't specifically a gRPC error code. And so the goal there was to talk a bit with the OpenTelemetry community more broadly and see if we could find some more generic error representation that would I mean, not only be amenable to, say, .NET exceptions, but maybe to Java exceptions or what other languages are doing. But in lieu of having, like, we haven't yet sort of had a proper discussion around that. And so we don't have any API that's sort of a strongly typed representation of error on the activity yet. And so without sort of a well-defined notion of how you should attach the error to the activity, we have also avoided trying to create any API syntactic sugar that would sort of run your scope and then attach an error if it occurred to the activity. I did, at least hypothetically, propose once we knew how we would attach it, we could make some version of start activity that basically took a delegate and you'd put all the code you wanted to run in your delegate, and we'd basically run that inside of a try-catch for you. And if it threw, we would assign the exception or some subclass of exception to the activity. But effectively, that whole thing got just postponed, trying to figure out what open telemetry specification for error would be, and then how that would surface on this API. So that's where we are right now.
So I assume that today, when we call scope.failed, I can even point to people, if people want to see our source code, I can put it in the chat room. But we call you know, in the catch block, we call scope.failed. And I assume scope.failed is something where we just add a bunch of tags and log you know, something that is not specifically an an exception. Just we log an event.
Right.
I assume that you would recommend that we keep doing this. We basically, we for example, could add an extension method on activity and just do the same thing. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, assuming that you would continue to value the back compat of what you're currently doing, because what you're currently doing is basically a convention that your team has adopted. I don't know, maybe someone else has adopted it as well, but I'm not familiar with it. But definitely at the BCL layer, there's not like a solid convention that all users of activity work towards. And likewise, that means for listeners, there's not something explicit that they can go and know that every user of activity would encode their error information the same way.
Yeah. Pavel, do you think it's going to work for us? We basically just add an extension method to activity, correct?
I don't think we would ever drop the client diagnostic type, unfortunately, because we need more features that are outside activity that we would use it for, like logging and whatnot. But yeah, if it wasn't for them, we would add an extension method and use activity directly. But
why can't we basically diagnostic scope? Our diagnostic scope would be just their activity source, or have a property that gives you activity source.
I mean, we can strive to get there. There is a ton of code already written, so we need to see if there is a benefit to completely switching, or if we want to keep the flexibility of the model we have.
Anyway, so maybe I don't want to take too much time from the API review on this issue, so maybe we can just offline check.
Yep.
Yeah, I want to add also about, like, we are proposing a new two APIs, I mean, in the activities, which is called set custom property and get custom property. This is to attach any other object to the activity object, but it's not strongly typed, as Noah mentioned. So this is kind of also can be used to attach like the exception or something to the activity. Just pointing to that.
Question. This is David. Scroll up a little bit to the activity add tag call. Does that start the activity first and then add tag? Is that if the listener wants to get tags, isn't that broken?
So So the listener gets multiple callbacks. They get a callback initially for sampling. They get a started and they get a stopped. And so the current assumption is that only in stopped at the end, which corresponds to the dispose of that using, should the listener assume that all the tags have been populated.
Okay.
However, there is an email discussion going on right now with someone who has said, well, I want to get the tags on the started callback. And so I basically asked them, and I've yet to receive a response, but hopefully we will soon. I was just sort of like, why does it matter that you get the tags on the started? Because as far as I can tell, that somewhat bucks historical trend. Anyway, I just want to find out from them like why they think tags on started would matter.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's go down. Okay, so the first thing we're adding here is activity kind. This is directly coming from the OpenTelemetry specs, and this is like enum defining the relationship between the activity and its parent. So it's adding this. I mean,
The meeting according to Teams.
It looks like my Teams line just crashed, so... Let's try this again. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Good.
Okay, there we go.
All right, we are back.
okay, so yeah, I mean, so activity kind, we are going to have like a new property in activity class, which is you can have the kind on it. Any comment for that before we go to the next?
Well, our design guidelines say you should always name your zero value. You can name it unknown.
Yeah, this is how it's defined in OpenTelemetry. I mean, I'm not sure if we have to strict to ours or to there. I mean, because like if we used ours, I'm not sure if this would be usable there. But yeah, I mean.
Right. So what's the OpenTelemetry concept this is mapping to? Because I want to see if they mention that they're not using the zero value.
Yeah, I mean, this is how it's defined. I mean, how it's implemented in.
I mean, we should be able to bring up a corresponding specification for OpenTelemetry.
Right.
But those values are explicit. Like they do not define the zero value. They only define 1 through 5.
Right. And so if they're explicitly avoiding zero, then we can add zero is unknown.
I put a link there. You can check. It's the OpenTelemetry spec.
So where did you post the link?
In the chat.
Window you can't see.
I see. Hold on. Too many windows floating around here. And the fact that my PC is at maximum capacity is also not helping. Come on, teams, you can do it. Only not.
So
they seem to be only defining words.
So yeah, I mean, I guess that's where also this gets a little tricky. Is so there's a language agnostic specification, and then there is a C# implementation of OpenTelemetry. So my guess is that the C# implementation is the thing that currently sets it up such that zero is not defined.
I think the other implementation is setting it same values. I mean, like Java or something. This is why we stick with that.
Right. Like, I think it's a good idea not to default someone into a value. Like, if you pick the 0 value to be one of these terms, then somebody who doesn't initialize it and has it as a field gets that value, which is probably not what they want. So having it be an unknown value is valid.
Python, it looks Python defining it as 0. So I think
it sounds like Python says internal is 0.
Okay. So
I guess that's actually what the spec says. It says internal is the default value.
Okay.
Yeah, and that is what, like if you call start activity and you don't use an overload that passes the kind, you get intentional. So maybe we should,
your 0 value.
Maybe we should just renumber so that will be 0.
Okay. Okay, and we will shift all other values, I mean, right? I mean...
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll stick like what Python is doing here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay, next is the activity context, and this is the context of the tracing. I mean, this is very simple, structure, which contains 4 values. It's trace ID, span ID, and the flags and the state, which represents the trace context. And this context usually, get transferred through the wire.
I have a question about the namespace.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just noticed. So did you consider putting it in a sub namespace of System Diagnostics? There are so many different technologies in the diagnostics route.
I put it under System Diagnostics because activity class itself is under System Diagnostics. This is the only reason I put it there. And activity is using it. But I don't have any strong opposition. If you think like we should have this inside sub namespace or something like this.
Yeah, it seems like
it will be hard. If somebody using activity, so they have to use another namespace. Just to support this new APIs.
Yeah, probably it is a good reason to just keep it here. I'm looking at the System Diagnostics namespace. I actually don't see the activity. Oh, it's in .NET Core, not in .NET Framework, correct?
No, it is there, but it's in some NuGet package or something.
It's all banned in .NET Framework. That's why it's probably not showing up in the docs.
I see. Yeah.
System.Diagnostics source DLL.
Right.
So I guess given that activity is already in the root, we have to keep it in the root.
Yes.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay. So going back to activity context, as I mentioned about it just has four properties. Describing the context. And is defined, we already have the activity trace ID and the activity span ID. This already defined before. This is not new types, which is we're already using it. And the activity trace flag also. So any question regarding those?
Yeah, I have a question here. So is it this trace state property, is it about double-cited trace context representation?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
And also this is matching the OpenTelemetry specs. So okay. Yeah, go down.
Actually, I have a small API convention comment. So the operator on activity context, it has parameters context 1, context 2. I think we started to call them left and right.
Okay.
And the parameter to equals, I think we call them value. There's a convention. I think it's actually described in the guidelines.
Sounds good. Left and right. Thank you. Next is activity event. Also, this is coming from the Open Telemetry specs. It's just defining event. Event have like name, timestamp, and optionally it can have some attributes like key value pairs. I mean, like from string to objects. So yeah, I mean, just we adding this also because OpenTelemetry is supporting it.
Can I ask a question about this particular class?
Yes.
Actually, yeah, I'm from IC3, and we are starting to use OpenTelemetry actively in our Arg. And is it something that's similar to logs? So that can be correlated with activities or with spans. So what is the purpose of this activity event or span event?
Yeah, according to the specs, I mean, the OpenTelemetry specs is just like a way you can add to the tracing more events, which is tagged with some timestamps. This is the purpose of it.
Yeah, I mean, from what I saw in the OpenTelemetry specification, I think, I don't know if this is the canonical use, but this sounded like at least one of the intended uses was for gRPC streaming, where you have packets of data coming in periodically, but all those packets together sort of represent one request. It's just not being delivered in a single message. And so they would log events every time a new packet would come in. So you could basically understand the timeline for when all your data arrived. I don't know, Riley might know more, but it sounded like that was one use case of this thing. More generically, to me, it seemed like it was just sort of a logging mechanism that they had sort of loosely attached to activities, where now every activity can have some arbitrary log of things that happened while that activity was running. And then that all of it would get logged as part of your distributed trace. And assuming that your backend telemetry mechanism and your viewing portal was functional enough, you'd be able to get this data back and look at it.
Yeah, I think the event is more like owned by the actual activity or the span. So if people want to, let's say, do sampling, they want to turn off the trace entirely. In this way, you don't have any associated event. So you got the performance optimization. But if you have another stream where you want to log something, regardless of whether people sample the trace or not, then it will be a separate thing. And I think in .NET, in general, we want to pursue the iLogger path. So both of them are the ways that you can attach specific information and collect that they have different purpose. And you need to think about like sampling and whether you want to enable trace or not.
I see. Yeah. So that basically means that these events basically are like attached to the activities or spans.
Yes.
But
yes.
iLogger events are not. And
Correct.
If I need to correlate somehow logger events and activity or span events or spans itself, how can I do it? Probably it's like it's out of scope of this meeting, but we can elaborate it later.
There's actually a specific issue to figure out how to. Yeah, so there's actually an issue on core effect on .NET runtime to enable correlating activity IDs with logs by default.
Yes.
We can send you the issue to look at.
Let me try to bring it. Just 1 second, I'm trying to get it.
Well, here, while Tarek's doing that, we may as well, if you want to quickly scroll down to the activity class API, just to demonstrate, where's activity? Okay, there it is. So you see there's a new API there called add event, and there's a property that is an enumerable of all events that you've added to the activity. So that's just the list of events that have been logged on that activity. So that's where activity event gets used. It's just the strongly typed item that goes into that list.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I got it. So as I pointed to the issue that David was talking about here.
Right. That's the link to the issue where we're working on iLogger activity correlation.
Thank you.
All right. Should we go back up and keep going?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we were on activity then.
Yeah, go down. Yeah, next is the activity link. And this is a way that you can, if you have like tracing operation, which is coming in batches and you want to link different tracing together. So you create, anybody is saying something? Okay. Yeah, so the link is just to add a link to other tracing context to the current activity. So the link is just simply it has activity context, which is you can link to the other this activity context to the specific activity, and also it has optional attributes, which is key value pairs. I mean, you can add to this link. And of course, I mean, activity will have some property. I mean, like when you create the activity, you have the way to pass the I enumerable of links there.
I have a question. Why is activity event a class? There are some types that are structs, like the activity context, but then activity event is a class. Any reason for it?
Actually, no specific reason for that. It can be struct like the other ones, yes.
It's immutable, correct? And relatively small.
Yeah, I enumerable, yes.
Okay. We should consider. I don't know if it's
okay.
Right.
That's a good point. And struct. Okay. Okay. Any question regarding the activity link? Okay, so let's move forward.
I assume the same comment on equals naming and operator equal and not equal that Christoph already mentioned before.
Yeah,
I'll write it down.
Should be left and right. Yes, good boy. Okay, next the activity data request. This is it's our way. I mean, like it's a enum that it define how you want to create the activity. So the value of this enum is get returned from the listener callback. So when we try, when we're calling activity source.start activity, it will call the listener, and the listener will return this enum to us. And the enum is first value is none, means that he's not interested. The listener is not interested to create the activity at all. And second one is propagation data. This is telling like, I need to create the activity, but the purpose of this activity is just for propagation. So it doesn't have to carry data like tags or events or whatever. And third value is all data, means that need to create the activity and I need to carry, to populate all data with it. And last one is just for having like create activity, having full data on it, and this will get propagated. Yeah, this is some kind of confusing in the naming because the state of propagation, in Open Telemetry is called the recorded, and the recorded means something else in our activity class. This is why we tried to come up with these names that I think Noah suggested those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The quick history there is, so W3C, the specification that defines the trace ID, it has, I should say the trace context. It defines a bit, and that bit indicates whether you expect to sample the context or not. And this bit flows across the wire and everybody sees it. The idea is if someone sets the bit high, then all the listeners downstream should log it. That bit in 2019, when the runtime team implemented the specification, was called the recorded bit. And then sometime very shortly before the specification got ratified or whatever, confirmed, they changed the name of the bit to be sampling bit. Unfortunately, at that point, the runtime had already implemented as recorded. So the name for that bit in our API is called recorded. And then, unfortunately, to make matters worse, Open Telemetry went and they reused the name recorded to mean something else because they had renamed the bit to be the sampling bit. All that said, we decided to try and keep the naming consistent within our own API, as in .NET is sort of self-consistent, but it does not wind up being consistent with the specification. Our other alternative would be we could be consistent with the specification for naming here, which would make our API internally inconsistent. So those were our two options. Like, there's got to be an inconsistency somewhere. It's just, are we inconsistent with our own name that we used in activity, or are we inconsistent with the spec? At the moment, we're inconsistent with the spec.
Yes.
Which is a principle I don't think is bad, because I think from a consumer standpoint, it is way more important that things are self-consistent on a given platform.
Okay, that was my rationale as well.
Okay. Any comment on the naming itself? Is it kind of clear or? So we are good.
This might be more like a spec question, but it seems like I can see this deteriorating over time into a bit vector, because it seems like it's already like combining multiple things, and then if they add more things in the future, then you basically end up with an enum with all probable, with all combinations, which seems like a bad idea in the long run.
Yeah, it's true. Right now they treat this thing effectively as a bit vector of, well, let's see. Theirs is kind of a bit vector of 2 bits. Ours is arguably a bit vector of 3 bits. I guess it depends how you interpret it.
We're sort of a 2 bits and an extra bit which means that it would be a nullable of a 2-bit bit vector.
Yeah, I mean the first. Yeah, I mean you could model this thing as just being a 3-bit vector.
Well, except it's invalid to specify whatever the
not
extra data is without asserting propagation. So it has invalid states, which means we don't like it as a flag xenum.
Yeah, I mean, certainly at the moment, if you modeled it as a 3-bit vector, the only valid states are sort of where all the ones are to the left and all the zeros are to the right. Like you can decide how many places are filled with ones. So you can either have 4 zeros or you can have 3 zeros or 1 and 2 zeros or 2 ones and a 0 or all ones.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with what Jeremy said regarding like combinations being, that they all should be legal, but there's a trade-off, right? If you have 12 different items and like certain combinations of items are invalid, it's probably easier to model it as a bit mask and then just validate when you construct it that you don't have inconsistent state than, an enum with like 1,200 items in it that have all sorts of combinations spelled out, right? So like if it's literally just these items and we think that's stable, that's fine. But if we expect them to grow, then eventually there will be a problem, right?
I would say I'm optimistic that these would be stable or reasonably stable, but I certainly can't, make like a really strong guarantee around it.
Yeah, I mean, like it's combinatorics though, right? If they only add 2 items, right, our approach will fall back already, right? So they don't have to add like 12 items to it to become a problem.
Yeah, I mean, certainly so far, everything they've done doesn't have combinatorial expansion because each thing is just always strictly a superset of the thing that came before, and it's actually illegal to sort of say, I want the new data, but I don't want some of the old data.
Right. Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, it's not to say that they wouldn't maybe break that pattern at some point, but they also currently model this thing as an enum, not as a bit vector in the open telemetry spec.
Okay, so that's good because it means that they would have the same problem.
Yeah, so that I think it's going to nudge the open telemetry spec to not suddenly do something that would be better represented as a bit vector. I can hope, anyways.
I'll add it to the other book that Jeremy's working on called Famous Last Words.
I think that's every book everyone writes.
Well, in that case, I should just make a way stronger statement so it'll look worse later.
Okay. Yeah, next is the activity source, and this is one of the most important types we're introducing here. And the purpose of this type is the new way to create and start activity with the mechanism of like trying to avoid creating the activity if nobody is listening. Also, this is activity source is a way also to add a listener if you want to listen to the activities. So you will do it through this activity source. So basically, you create the activity source using the name and version. The name usually, conventionally, it will be like the component name, like whatever, azure.http, whatever, .co, something like this. And version is just the version of this component. So the version is requested because there is possibility, like to collect tracing information from different version of the same component. So this is why we got the version there. We originally proposed the version as a version class that we had, but it was requested later to be a string to have more flexibility to put to specify the version the way that the consumer would like.
Semver, right?
Yeah.
So you can add, dash alpha, whatever.
Yes. Okay.
So I have a question about the API to add listeners. It takes a lot of the funcs take a lot of parameters, and it's kind of like similar to events. The API is correct, like I subscribe a callback, and it's gonna be called at some point.
Not all of them. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think 2 or 3 of them it's defined as func, which is because we need to get a return value from the callback.
Yes. So, but what I wanted to talk about is when we invented the event pattern, we decided to use event args, and the reason for it is that, when you have like methods that just take parameters, you can always add overloads if you need more, but it's harder for callbacks. I wonder whether this API should not be redesigned to use kind of a similar pattern to what we do in events, where even if you want to use a func, you create like a property bag that has all the things that are passed into the callback, such that if we add more parameters in the future on the producing side, we just add them to the event args. You know what I mean?
Can we scroll down to the actual API that adds the listener? Because we're not looking. There we go. Okay. Right. So I would say one argument for not doing that is that these, specifically, where are we? So the two funcs right now that have the long list of parameters attached to them. So those funcs are called as part of the sampling algorithm, which puts them they're on the sort of hottest path in all of this code. They're going to get called every time you call activity source.start activity. And even if you're sampling everything out, saying, I don't want to listen to any of this stuff, you're still going to make that call to find out that you don't want to listen to any of this stuff. And so far, we've been taking some effort, going out of our way to make that path, have as few allocations in it as possible. So if we made this thing use an event arg, we would either have to allocate that event arg object each time we made the call, or we'd have to make like a thread static cache of them, and you'd have to do like a lookup to get your thread static arg to invoke it. Both of those would have some performance overhead.
Well, so you could just package them all in a Struct event args. So I think the networking stack, the socket APIs, they wanted to optimize. They don't inherit from not me. They don't. The event args, I think, in socket APIs, Steve can talk to this. I think they don't inherit from event args for this reason.
Okay.
And it's just basically a struct. It's a property bag. I know it would be large, but kind of it's a wash, because now you just have a func with lots of parameters. They have to be passed anyway. So, wow, what is this?
I mean, I have absolutely no objection to doing it as a struct. Does that? I don't know. I mean, does that kind of? It seems like you wouldn't necessarily get the advantages you were originally getting from event args. Oh, did we lose?
Well, you would get an advantage in a sense that if you in the future want to pass more things into the callbacks, you just add fields to the struct. As opposed to now, it would be very complicated because you kind of then would have callbacks with that many parameters and with that many parameters, and people have to sign up to either or both. Then you have to decide you call both or just one of them.
Right. Is that somehow I thought adding fields to a struct wouldn't be a legal change, but just tell me I'm wrong.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Wait, aren't events supposed to return void? Or do we not care about that?
Well, so yes, so I know you mentioned that this func returns something. So the way it's done in events is kind of a bit strange, but I think it's fine. So we have some event args where you actually set a property or call a method on the event args to return.
But it doesn't work with mutable. Sorry, it doesn't work with read-only struct. So now it's a mutable struct, and you get all the copy problems. And
well, I mean, you'd have to be passing it as ref, which wouldn't be the event pattern anyway, in order to use a mutable struct.
Well, you can. You don't have to pass it. If it's a method, you basically just have a struct that points to the main context of, and calls a method on the context.
But I think we are conflating things here together. Like, I mean, just because we take all these 4 arguments and we pack them in a struct doesn't mean that we now finally that we suddenly cannot return values anymore.
That's also true. We could basically keep using a func instead of event handler that doesn't have returns.
Right.
Correct.
In all seriousness, though, like I would even if we pack it together, I probably still wouldn't use a raw func, because, I mean, if you just look at the signature on the screen, people had to kind of find creative formatting ways to make this not readable like garbage. I would probably just still make it a strongly typed delegate that you can actually name and document, because then you can take it as an ordinary type. You don't have to have these nested generics. I think that's probably better still.
That's also worth considering.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, no objection to that from me. So, I mean, just to make sure. So, I mean, I think there's a few different things that have been thrown out. So, one is sort of collapsing all of these parameters into a struct, and I'm guessing there's 2 different variations of that. One would be we sort of collapse all the input parameters into a struct, but leave activity data requests, the return value, separate. Or there's another variation where you put that into the struct too. I mean, I would probably favor where we don't collapse activity data into the struct, activity data request into the struct. And then there's a second one to say, let's just have a strongly typed delegate so we're not using func. And then I don't know if at some point there was a proposal that we actually make this be the event pattern, like define an event with an event handler.
There's also a small variation if you wanted a struct, but you wanted to avoid, passing all these additional arguments, is you pass it by ref, which would still require a custom delegate, but.
I think we should design it offline. There are so many knobs here. I would just record an issue and kind of think about all the implications of various options we have.
Yeah, I want to point also about like most of this parameters that passed is matching what we are calling from start activity. So maybe, I mean, like, if we are going to have like struct or something like this, maybe the other APIs should take the structs too. If you go up a little bit, Emma. Yeah, as you see, here. As you see, start activity is actually taking almost matching whatever the parameters we are passing to the callbacks down there.
Yeah.
So maybe we can collect this. I mean, take it offline with Christoph and other people.
Yeah, having said that, as we were discussing before, the main scenario will be to call start activity with just the name.
Yes.
So if we make it into a struct, we would have to add overloads. I'm not sure. It's worth playing around with it, with this idea, but I think it would be totally acceptable for the listener to use the struct, but for start activity to just have simple overloads or default parameters as you have right now.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to point out about this parameter is matching whatever the parameter for the callbacks. But yeah, okay. Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, I also have a question, about the activity source. So it's look like really similar to the tracer from OpenTelemetry. And in tracer, it is like a possible to start a new span, which not be an active span. But here, I guess we by starting the new activity, we are starting the nested activity. We are creating new activity in the current context.
Yes.
Right.
So yeah, but if I would just want to, let's say to start a span or activity, and to do something on it, and aiming the telemetry from it, but not to have it as an active activity in this current context. I mean, in activity we have current property. And in .NET is in activity class, but in OpenTelemetry, this current span property is in tracer class. So there's a difference, and it can be confusing. What do you think?
I think the thing you were initially pointing out is that we don't currently offer any API that could create an activity for you that is in an unstarted state.
Yeah. So there's a different things. So the first one is that when we using activity source to create an activity, we are basically creating the new active activity.
Right.
It will be accessible via activity.current. But this is a difference from the OpenTelemetry concept. When we have something something separated from span, from activity, and these currents can be accessible not by span itself, but by the tracer. So I mean, having these two different APIs, which from one side is really similar to each other, but from the other side is a different. Can be confusing for the developers. Just want you to ask your opinion on this.
Sure. So I think I mean, I'm certainly open to having some sort of API that creates an unstarted activity, but I feel like we probably need to dive into that offline to make sure we understand the scenario that's supporting a little bit better and figure out, how important it is and then how it needs to work.
Isn't it the old constructing activity was new? I mean, what we have today is enough for this scenario? You create activity with new activity, and
well, that's what I want to find out. How does it interact with sampling? The constructor that we have right now doesn't really interact with sampling. But I don't understand yet whether or not this scenario being proposed, where you create unstarted activities on the tracer, they interact with sampling in some way, which is part of why I'm suggesting it's probably better that we would take it offline, because I can imagine there'd be a bit of detail that we get into here.
Let's get it offline, because I can show you the example how it can be useful. In asynchronous cases, it's really useful when you don't want to have it active, but still you want to emit some telemetry from the subspan. Let's say.
Okay. And then the other one you raised, I think, is just to say there's a pre-existing static property on activity, which is activity.current. And you're saying OpenTelemetry exposes their version of activity source is called tracer, and that they expose tracer.current. And so then you're just saying it's
they
different here.
They're exposing current span property in tracer.
I guess I'd say my predilection is to sort of keep the API we've already got, the activity.current .current and just sort of acknowledge that that is a difference between what the spec suggests versus what .NET implements. But I mean, I think if people gave us a lot of feedback that was really confusing, it doesn't seem too problematic to me that you would add a property to activity source whose only purpose is just to go call activity.current and return you the same value that activity.current would have returned, except now it's a property of activity source instead. My hunch here was that we're not going to have a ton of developers going to look at the open telemetry specification like as written as a document and sort of say, hey, I thought it would work this way, but then I went to go look at your API and it didn't work that way. I imagine the folks doing design for open telemetry probably get a lot of experience looking at that spec, but my hunch is that most developers that use this API will not be doing that. And so they have less ammunition with which to be confused.
I want to point out also about there is discussion now to get rid of span fully, to get rid of it in the OpenTelemetry side. So probably, we will not have a span there in the OpenTelemetry. And regarding the tracing, the tracer, I'm not seeing this would be a big problem, even in OpenTelemetry. You can still implement the tracer.current span or .current activity, which will just call activity to current. So we can have both. It shouldn't conflict, I believe.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Any other comments for activities before we move forward?
So I have a few more questions on some of the shapes here. So what is this version that is passed in? Why is it a string? Is it just an arbitrary thing?
So it's a string because OpenTelemetry requests that their version can represent the semver standard.
I see.
And my understanding of semver is that you can put string-looking things on it, like it doesn't have to just be a set of numbers. Like you put a dash and a suffix to indicate some private build or something like that. And all the examples that we saw, had that kind of stuff going on in their spec.
Are there any comparisons that we need to do? Or is this basically just a black box value that is passed to the underlying API? Are there any cases where we have to, for example, compare for less than equal or something?
We as the framework, we never look at it. To us, it's just a black box piece of data that the instrumenter gives to us, and we just hand it along to the listener, and we say that's what they gave us. We have asked the OpenTelemetry folks for some clarification on what they thought people would do with the version, because their spec isn't particularly clear about how someone would go about using that version. But at the moment, I don't have any additional clarity on it other than they put it in their spec, and so we added the property to match.
I see. And then the other question I had is, you have a lot of enumerables of key value pairs of string, comma, string. Should this be just an I-read-only dictionary of string, comma, string?
Dictionary? Yeah, in some cases, I think most of them. So OpenTelemetry specs requires the ordering to be preserved. So yeah, the way that you log the stuff, it should be ordered, like in the links and the events and the tags and whatever. So this is why we went with the IEnumerable.
Does this also?
How would
this?
Sorry,
go ahead.
You're blocking each other.
You go, Lima.
I think my question was if we go with an IEnumerable of key value pair, what are we how do people construct the values? Because the most canonical implementation people can probably think of is a dictionary, and then they would immediately lose that, right? Like, should we then provide some sort of thing that they can actually do something with, like new, I don't know, tag collection or something that happens to have that shape? Because otherwise people will probably misuse that and just use a dictionary, and that will, as you said, not preserve that order.
Yeah, I see. So you are suggesting to have like a new type for this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it seems. I mean, like the thing is, it's an argument that I have to pass in, right? If I call activity source.start activity, then well, I have to manufacture this thing somehow, right? And like if I see an enumerable of key value pair, I can't help myself but think of iDictionary or a dictionary, right? And I'm probably not the only one.
Yeah, I feel like we should follow up with, well, unless I don't think Sergey is here. I don't know, Riley, do you happen to know why the order of the tags would matter?
I don't remember specifically for tags, but for other things, I mean, like the specs was clear about the ordering should be preserved. But
I feel like, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I mean,
so part of me is suspicious that even if the spec says the order should be preserved, I can't offhand think of why it would matter for the order to be preserved. I mean, it's not, I don't think there's a scenario where you'd specify the same key and then a different value. So yeah, I don't know why it would matter that the order was.
I mean, the only thing I can think of is if you nest them, that maybe the intention is that similar to command line arguments, where if you pass the tag again with a similar key, you override the previous value.
The only reason that I know is all the fields here, they have a limitation. For example, you cannot have like unlimited number of tags. So if people want to add new tags, which tag will get sacrificed? And the answer is the first in, like first out.
I see.
Okay. I mean, but to be clear, our activity is not implementing that sort of bounded recording. If you give us 1,000 tags, then we just record 1,000 tags, and we trust people not to give us ridiculously large amounts of data. So that would be another suggestion, that if the only reason for the ordering was to control which things got destroyed and we never destroy anything, then maybe the order just doesn't matter in our context.
Yeah, and I remember I asked the question whether we would consider to change that to a bounded list, and so this, we can follow up offline. I'll paste a link in OpenTelemetry Python, like how people implement the bounded list.
Okay. I mean, part of this is also that tags is a pre-existing property on activity before this proposal. And so I don't think, I mean, just for back compat, we'd be unable to change it. So the only thing that we could do potentially is add some brand new concept. But anyway, it sounds like there's enough uncertainty here that we should just take it offline.
Yeah, as long as it preserves the order. For example, if we have exporter trying to consume the data, we can decide, okay, the underlying system can only support like 20 tags, so we're picking the latest one.
Okay, I see how that would make order matter. Okay, but yeah, we'll take that one offline.
Let's go to the activity class itself. Okay, for activity, the first thing you will notice we added iDisposable interface to it. As I mentioned earlier about like when disposing the activity, if it is started, so we will stop it. This is what the dispose is going to do. This is just to simplify the pattern that writing the code when using activity.
What happens if you don't dispose it?
It will not get stopped, and this means that it will be in the okay. So activity, it has like activity.current, which is async local. So it will be part of the execution context. So if you didn't stop it, so it will stay there.
So what happens to all existing use of activity that's not being disposed?
Okay.
So those activities call the stop API explicitly, and dispose is basically just a syntactic sugar for calling stop.
I see. So this is purely to enable someone to more easily write the code they're already doing.
Yes.
Doing it using.
Yes.
Also, the first activity in the chain that actually disposes or stops would clean up all its child activities that didn't dispose themselves. So if you didn't dispose your activity, but somebody disposed your parent, you're fine. I mean, you're not perfectly fine, but at least it won't be in memory forever and like polluting all your traces for ages.
Yes, there's some degree of fallback there.
The async local could just also use a weak reference, so it would just get GC'd eventually anyway.
Okay, so
yes, technically it could. I mean, currently it doesn't, and we're not necessarily proposing to change that. But yes, it probably could be implemented that way.
I mean, wait, could it? I mean, wouldn't since no one's holding on to a strong reference to it, wouldn't it just go away very quickly?
Well, I mean, if they put it in a using, there's still a strong reference, and if they're manually calling stop, there's still a strong reference. If they were never going to call stop, why are we remembering it was there?
I thought they were calling stop on the one they got out of the async local. Right? Are they calling stop on activity.current?
So the usual pattern that we suggest would be that they would have a local variable rather than they would get it from activity current. But it is true, nothing in the past would have prevented them from sort of using activity.current as their local variable and not making their own, legitimate local variable, in which case, if they had written it that way, then having that be a weak reference would be a breaking change to their code.
Okay. I missed the part where that was surfaced as opposed to just a tracking detail. So never mind.
Yeah, I mean they could read it back from activity.current. It's not what we would have recommended that they do, but it would have been legal code.
Okay.
So the activity already exists, right, and already shipped.
Yes.
Right? So
yes.
How do we, Jeremy? I'm not sure. I read the guidelines recently, but you certainly did. So what do we feel about adding iDisposable to an existing type people can derive from?
I mean, we did it in 4.0 or 4.5 or whatever for a bunch of types that really you did need to call close on them. Like you had a manual close, and we added iDisposable for no, really, you should have this in a using statement. I mean, people who are currently calling stop will still call stop depending on what sort of analyzers or other tools they have. It'll tell them, hey, you made you have a iDisposable thing, you should put it in a using statement. Though, since you don't call new, depending on what flow they do, they may not understand what the ownership rules are. But I think it's fine, and it matches what we approved for the recent updates of if there's a stop method that you're supposed to call in a finally, then just be iDisposable.
But that should also mean that it should implement the dispose pattern, right? Because people can derive from activity.
Assuming that the other version of the partial doesn't say it's sealed, then yes.
It is not.
Interesting.
There's a public constructor and it's not sealed.
Okay. Somehow I thought it was sealed.
Okay. So it just needs to add protected disposable and.
Okay.
Okay. So what I want to point at in the activity, the addition here is the first is a display name. So when you create the activity, you create it with what we call it operation name or whatever. And we got the request from OpenTelemetry, to be able to change the name. And we thought about it and we found like this would be a breaking change. Which is can break many people about that. So the workaround that we decided to go with is to introduce display name, which is by default to return the operation name, which is the activity name. And this display name can be settable. So people can just change the display name if they need to. So doing that, we will just keep the app compat and we'll give the way that you can change the name on the activity.
I have a question about the set custom property, get custom property.
Yes.
Since they accept null values, how can I tell whether the property even exists?
You don't need to. If you no, really. It doesn't matter if it exists or the value is not. Both of them is the same, I believe.
Oh, really? Okay.
Maybe the other way of doing it would be what would be the point of calling set custom property and making property value null if the result that I get from get custom property is the same as if I had never even called set custom property in the first place.
Well, we make the distinction between null values and value being absent in dictionary and many other similar APIs.
Right. But I'm saying this API doesn't.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like if we believe that there's no distinction there, then maybe we should just tell people don't bother to call the API if the thing you were going to set is, oh wait, were we using that to sort of clear it? Is that why we had it?
Right.
So you could set a null, you could set it to a non-null value, and then later you could call set custom property again with a null value to effectively say I want to remove the property that I previously set.
Yeah, exactly. That's the reason we did that. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So if we think that there's no reason to have a null value, I guess that's fine. We should just be sure. Otherwise, we should do like a try API, like a proper dictionary API.
We're not aware of any reason to have a null property. The whole usage for this set and get custom property is a little bit vague. It's sort of a open-ended mechanism that people could do extensibility on activity, but it really didn't seem well defined exactly what it was that they want to put into this thing.
All right, sounds good to me.
Sorry if I missed it, but why do we need a back reference to activity source? And shouldn't it be nullable?
So the back reference to the source is because the source contains sort of the component version name and the component name and the component version. Effectively, it's more metadata that's attached to your activity. So that's the reason for having the source there. And the reason it isn't nullable is because we just defined that there is a global singleton source that has empty string as its name and 0.0.0.0 as its version. and that if you call the constructor, which doesn't provide a source, then that's the singleton that we give you.
Okay.
I have a question about the activity context property.
Mm-hmm.
So in the proposal, activity context has properties about like a parent activity or parent span, right? Or, sorry, it has trace ID, span ID.
Yes, trace ID, span ID, and flags and state. Yes.
Yeah, but activity itself has properties about like a root ID, span ID,
right,
and actually parent span ID, parent ID, and link to a parent activity. So in this case, we will have like a duplicating API, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, context is just helping you gather up those properties more quickly and put it into this structure. It's you could do the same thing without that API. If you created your activity context manually and you called the 4 properties on activity that give you the 4 fields of the context and you shove them all into the constructor, you could get the same thing as what that context property is doing. It's just attempting to make it a little bit easier to do that operation without having to write it yourself.
Okay.
All right. I think that's all what we have today.
Sorry, I have one more question that I just noticed. Is like, let me just scroll up again to find it. Of course, now I can't find it anymore. Yeah, here we go. So I assume this one you just cache the instance that is given to you, right?
Yes.
Okay, so like otherwise my question would have been whether we should take iRead-only dictionary, but like if you stash the instance as itself, then it makes sense to take a dictionary because then it remains immutable on the later when you expose it.
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure we want it to be mutable.
I see. Okay, in that case. So
maybe even if you didn't realize it, maybe this should really be iRead-only dictionary. Do you recall, Tarek? I feel like the spec probably wanted that to be immutable.
iRead-only dictionary just means that you, the receiver, promise not to mutate it. It doesn't mean that the original value owner can't mutate it later.
Yeah.
So if you want an immutable dictionary, that would be immutable dictionary.
Yeah, I think I got this from the specs. I mean, as iDictionary, but not the specs. I mean, like the implementation of .NET in OpenTelemetry. But I think this should be enumerable. I believe.
You mean enumerable of key value pair?
Yeah.
Again, kind of like everything else turned into. Okay. Well, maybe that's a note for us to go track down offline.
Yes.
Because I believe the spec wanted this to be immutable, and it's possible it's another place where it says that the order mattered as well.
Yeah, good catch, Emma.
Also on that note, do you want to make it just one, like a defaulted parameter rather than having an overload? Because you marked it as nullable, you might as well just have it as attributes equals null.
Yeah, so what is the design guidelines here? Because I heard 2 opposites, opinions. Yeah, one opinion is saying no, don't use optional parameters. Like it's confusing. People look at the documentation and they think that they have to pass it or something like this. And the other opinion saying no, that's totally fine. And IntelliSense maybe can help you with it. I don't know. I'm neutral here. Just whatever the design guidelines guys recommend, we will follow.
I think Christoph can talk to the findings that the Azure usability study showed, but my understanding was that they had some APIs that basically had like 12 arguments or something on a key scenario, like, you know, connect to a server. And people missed in IntelliSense, you know, the brackets that these arguments were optional. So they tried hard to construct the thing with 12 arguments, and then they wasted a lot of time. So I think the idea is that for key scenarios that people use a lot, you should have simple APIs that don't take that many arguments, even if you default them, because people miss that they're defaulted. At the same time, we try to not have a gazillion overloads for things that, you know, there's just an additional state that you can pass in or not. But I think in this case, it seems fine to have an optional parameter. Like I would. What I personally like about them is that it also states what the default is, right? For null, it's kind of obvious, but in other cases like enums, it's not obvious what the default is otherwise.
Yeah, and I also think these APIs are not really mainline scenario APIs. I suspect people who want to, you know, work with activities, they won't have a problem with optional parameters.
Yeah, the guideline we wrote was, I mean, things are very complicated once you introduce virtuals and a lot of overloads, but effectively you can have up to 2 for free, and after that you need to make another overload that just removes all your default and shows just only the required parameters. But they're allowed sometimes.
Okay, so it sounds we can go to the optional parameter here. Yeah. Okay, sounds good.
All right, so I have a bunch of notes. I will publish them in the usual spot. I will respond to the meeting invite with a link to the PR with the notes, and then I guess this is it. I mean, unless somebody has major issues with that, I think I consider the API approved with feedback, and that's the end of that.
Cool. Yeah, thanks all for your feedback.
Yes.
I mean, there was the big issue about how that event-like pattern is going to work, so that one may still require a follow-up emo.
So which one?
The thing that was
Func.
2 very big funcs, or maybe rewrite it to be a struct, or maybe rewrite it to be an event args, or etc.
Yeah, we can take it offline. I mean, and we can report back on by the email or something with the decision. Yeah.
I mean, usually, like we only basically say if there's some massive open issue where we say, okay, this API needs rethinking. This one seems more like we already gave a bunch of ideas, and I mean, seems to me that no matter what they pick would be better than what they currently have. And we would be okay with that. I mean.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Alrighty. Then I wish everybody a happy day, and hope to see you on Thursday, or at least FXDC.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Thanks, Emo.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.